It don't need no reason to travel. Unknown horrors leaving in plain sight. Oh, God, stealing blade drives the world insane. Turn that evil darkness to healing light.
Hello and welcome to Dark Loops, the Seers of Ardham, a podcast in which we, the Seers of Ardham, discuss HBO's fantastic new series, Lovecraft Country. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher from Illinois State University. Joining me in tonight's discussion are the other members of the order. Brothers and sisters, please introduce yourselves and tell the audience a little something about yourself. Leandra.
I'm Leandra Parris. I'm an assistant professor at William & Mary of School Psychology, and my areas of interest are crisis intervention, trauma, and social justice.
Fantastic.
That's all I got.
All right. Vanessa.
I am Dr. Vanessa Hintz, licensed clinical psychologist, professor of psychology, diversity consultant, professional geek here in the Milwaukee area.
Fantastic. Stanford.
I'm Dr. Stanford Carpenter. I'm a cultural anthropologist coming to you from Chicago.
Fantastic. Cianna.
I'm Cianna Greaves. I am a public radio producer and podcaster, and I'm currently existing in two places at once, in Baltimore, Maryland, and in Chicago, Illinois.
Fantastic. And Byron.
I am Dr. Byron Craig, aka Peaches Cobbler, and I'm an assistant professor at Illinois State University in the School of Communication.
Well, on that note, Peaches Cobbler, we're going to start with you. By the way, the episode we're doing is episode 3, Holy Ghost.
Holy Ghost, yes. So I will start with my favorite scene, and I will say my favorite scene had to be, I think the exercising of the ghost in the basement. And mostly because this whole week since I've watched it, and I've watched this episode around 4 times because I am so taken with the music in this episode. And to hear Shirley Caesar's voice come in during that scene was absolutely magnificent to me. And that song, what was the name of the song? Satan, we're going to tear your kingdom down. Was just so amazing to me because, you know, this white man was this Satan, right? And just I think it just responded to that entire episode with you know, the elements, the themes of the church, and the different types of religion, not just Christianity, that were a part of that episode, right? And all those things coming together to really, you know, to save Letitia and Tick. And also those spirits, those ghosts that were in that house, right? To release them. So I think just from Tick taking on that, becoming that man, right? And you know, I think he's brilliant the way he uses his body throughout this show. And this was just another demonstration of how he used his body. But there's so much in that scene. And it was hard for me to choose just one scene with this episode, honestly. There was so much in all these scenes. I think it was one of the most brutally honest episodes that we've seen so far. And I'm sure we can talk about that later, but the brutality of the history of white racism, that episode, and I think this show is just bringing all that to life, because I have a lot of my students who are watching it are emailing me and asking me, Dr. Craig, what was that scene all about? Was this stuff true? You know, I'm like, yeah, this is, you know, why we talk about the, you know, brutalization of Black folk in America. You know, you can see it right there with the way this man dismantled those bodies. And I always tell them to go look at the book, A Medical Apartheid, to really read about, you know, the experimentation on Black bodies. So seeing those ghosts come and then to see them regain their whole bodies back again, right? To become what they were before this violence happened to their bodies was just absolutely amazing to me. Both frightening, but also beautiful at the same time.
So how many of you had that down as your favorite scene? Raise your hand. Anybody else? Okay. Why don't we just talk about that scene for a while then? Vanessa, you go ahead and go first.
Yeah, I think so a couple things. One, I like that all of the like sort of classic horror elements that were in this episode. Horror movies are like my favorite area of geekdom. And I like that there were a lot of, again, like traditionally scary things, like when the ghost is next to her in bed, like all of those things. But I think at the end, exorcism to me remains one of the scariest genres of horror. The Exorcist is by far the scariest film I've ever seen. I still will not watch it. But what I appreciated about this scene, you know, in addition to all of that, was how it was like, even in death, like, we're all we got. You know what I'm saying? Like, she called on Black folks that were, you know, moved on, passed on, you know, and I just really, that scene was so powerful to me. I was like tearing up watching it, because here are these people just like mutilated and, you know, but she called on them, no questions asked, just was like, listen, we need to get this white man out of here. And so
she even said, "You're not dead yet."
Yes.
He screamed at them, "You are not dead yet." And damn, that's awesome.
And the fact that they had the woman that they brought to sort of help them with the exorcism, I appreciated that they didn't bring like a Catholic priest, you know, like in The Exorcist. They really went to sort of like that sort of African, like those sort of like religious practices, which I think also just made that whole scene was just life. No pun intended, but it was like.
No,
you know, in the article you sent, it talked about the Haitian voodoo, which I thought was really strong, right? Bringing all these kind of different forms of religious practices together was really smart.
Leandra, how about you, since that was your favorite scene as well?
I mean, I had backups because I kind of knew that this was going to be
right.
Like it. I think my favorite quote was what you said earlier, like, "You're not dead yet, keep fighting." And I think that just her whole strength in that scene was beautifully done. And the fact that she's still, and when she's done, she's just sweating and she's drenched and she even looks smaller. Like, she's really put everything into this, and she's just so mad, and all of that Beyonce energy she had, you know, beating up those cars. You really see her pull all of that in, and she kind of says, "No, like, this is us, this is our fight." And I just loved how the whole scene played out. And then the fact that they became whole again, like, as they went around the circle and being able to fight this back and take back this power, I would say they were able to sort of move on and heal. And I think that that was just a really beautiful thing to see, in conjunction with, as Vanessa said, I love the horror, just the hands, you know, pulling at the sheet, just putting all of that together. I think it's one of the reasons I love Jordan Peele, is he just does such a great job of putting all of that in one space. So I just thought it was just really well done.
I completely agree. I thought she called out every one of their names. All of their trauma was witnessed by their traumatizer, right? And in that act of their names being stated, their trauma being acknowledged, they healed and they came back to their form. It was, all of that was done on purpose. And all I could hear was say their names, right? It was really well done. And her acting was, it was not just rage, it was spiritual outrage. Like you said, she looked like she had lost 20 pounds when that scene was finished. And I was just riveted and at the her complete immersion into that role. There was no border between who she was and who that character was. And I have to say, it was stunningly well done.
And you see that transformation happening with her throughout this episode, right? The way she ends up at that last scene, well, the second to the last scene with her, you kind of see that coming on, right, throughout the entire episode, right? And I won't go into those scenes, but you see that happening. And so, I mean, even in that scene, I mean, her lips are chapped, right? I mean, that's just like this draining of energy that's happening to her body. So yeah, I think it was she acted through that scene wonderfully.
Cianna, favorite scene, favorite line, favorite character?
I will say my favorite scene and my favorite character. My favorite character this week will definitely be Letty for all the reasons that we just discussed. My favorite scene was that opening scene where we see Letty weeping in church, and we hear this beautiful poem by Precious Ebony, who is this amazing poet and ballroom MC. And the poem that was used in that opening scene was actually a poem she did that was featured in a Nike Be True campaign, I believe it was called, which which highlighted athletes who were involved or themselves uplifting LGBTQIA community. So I found that really, really powerful, and it really did set the tone for what would be an incredibly emotional episode. And I think that scene actually would have worked as well at the end as it did in the beginning. There was this there was a thread of religion that sort of ran through this episode. And there's just something incredibly beautiful about seeing a character. And I think something that we can all relate with is this just weeping in church, this sort of silent release off the heels of something as traumatic as they experienced in Ardham. And it's sort of this unspoken trauma between her and between Letty and Tick, which I hope they flesh out in the next episode. Like, you know, I mean, we should talk about it, right? But I just thought that scene was silently beautiful, and I absolutely love that poem.
Yeah, I thought the way she started off in the episode and the way she ended in that final scene was this complete catharsis. You know, her sort of having seen what she had seen in Ardham, not yet completely processed it. And by the end of that episode, she knows exactly where she is, right? She knows exactly where the world is, and she ain't having it, right? She's just not having it. And she's letting you know very clearly. And the exhaustion you see in her body in that scene is not unlike the exhaustion many people feel right now, right? It's like, how much more? Right? I'm exhausted, and extremely well done. Stanford. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say one more thing about that church scene also, though, right? The beauty in starting off with that poem and then thinking about the church like as this place of, you know, of safety, of release, of redemption, of power, of organizing. Right. I thought also it was really smart to start off there in that scene. Right. You know, I mean, I grew up in the church. I don't go to church now, but I grew up in the church. Right. And the reason I grew up, the reason we weren't made to go to church in my family, but the reason I loved it so much because it seemed like this place of escape for me, of, you know, seeking forgiveness, this kind of like I said, organizing and planning. And I thought what worked really beautifully with that also was we actually seeing someone who's caught the Spirit, who's caught up in, who's got the Holy Ghost, right, going on with them at that moment.
Yeah, and that was Hippolyta, right? Was that Hippolyta?
I couldn't fit. That's what I was
thinking. I'm pretty sure that was her. It was her having the Holy Ghost.
Either, yeah.
Yeah.
Stanford, favorite line, favorite character, favorite scene?
I'm torn between two scenes, to be honest. So I'll mention one, and then maybe we can come back to the other one later. And I'll do them in order. So it was actually the scene with the kids and the Ouija board. And it wasn't. It was all the contrast, right? It's that you have it, and it's the kids that were there, right? You've got Dee. And you've got Gil, which is, you know, a reference to Gil Scott-Heron. And then you've got Bobo, which is the nickname for Emmett Till. And that you know, my favorite line was a one-word line, no, in response to his question about was he going to have a good time on his trip. You know, that scene encapsulated so many things that ultimately equate to what I refer to. I just have to say, it's the stakes of it all, right?
Yes.
You know, I thought it was what the joy that I got in that scene was actually seeing, Black kids downstairs during a grown folk party around a Ouija board being kids. And we have so much trouble seeing Black children and allowing Black children to be children. If you look at what's going on right now, that's kind of the undercurrent, right? We can't see, we don't get to be children. We only get to be grown-ups, even if we're only 2 years old. Somehow we still look like we're still scary, right? And that moment and even though that moment was ultimately disrupted by our knowledge of Bobo's fate, there was still something about that it really touched me, and it actually made it that much more horrifying when the Ouija board just said no. The other thing that was interesting about that scene is we don't know entirely what the message is about George, because if you'll notice when they're doing the Ouija board, they cut out a couple of words. So I suspect, and I'm sure other people start saying that it said George is not dead, because that might be the reason why Dee would react that way. As opposed, because if it just said George is dead,
right,
I'm not sure that she would. I mean, so that maybe that's just wishful thinking on my part. But there were actually 3 scenes in this episode that made me think of this whole issue of Black people being allowed to be children, and us feeling like we have to protect them because they are children, and us having fear for them because they are children, because they don't understand everything around them, and at the same time, and also to be quite honest, it humanized Emmett Till for me in a way that he hasn't been, because my images of Emmett Till are tied to the opening of the coffin. My descriptions of Emmett Till are primarily tied to text, right? And to see him like represented as a boy, as a Black boy with Black boy hopes and Black boy dreams. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Fantastic. No, it's apropos, and it really makes it a horror movie, right? And the horror comes from our knowledge of what's going to happen to this poor young man later, right? I mean, it really. Leandra, favorite scene, favorite line, favorite character?
So I think it kind of goes. My favorite scene was actually, I don't have a great reason for it, but it was where they're preparing breakfast, and Diana like looks down and she set a place for her dad, and she realizes what she's done, but she doesn't say anything. And then Hippolyta comes in, and like there's that mug that's sitting there, and you don't realize until later like why she's mad that the mug isn't sitting down instead of sitting up, But there's just all this tension going on in the room, and it just was a really good portrayal of grief, just like what it means to try to keep going on, and like George's presence is still so visceral in everything that they're doing and all the little things that they're setting out, and yet they're trying to like keep talking and keep moving. And I felt that was just a really, I don't know, just really moving, just kind of watching all these little details, especially later when you find out again like why she's so upset about the coffee or the little teacup being sitting up the way Atticus had put it. And so I think it goes back to what Cianna was saying about the trauma and the whole episode. Letty's like, I'm trying to reach for something that I lost when we had an experience. I'm going to church, I'm trying to find it in you, and I don't know how to get there. And I think that in that scene we're seeing that with Hippolyta too, where she's trying to figure out what happened. She's grieving, she's mad, she's so mad the whole episode. And I just felt like it was a really nice, it's not a nice scene, but very good portrayal of everyday grief.
Without a whole lot of words having to be said, right? I mean, it's just in how you behave, what you do, how your body moves, right? And suddenly, oh my God, that doesn't work. Oh my God, absolutely. I interrupted someone, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, I think that just to your point, Scott, also to what you said, Leandra, like you could feel it was thick. Like that scene was thick. And even though there wasn't a lot of, words, it was just like you felt it like, ooh, this is awkward. And then, like when I think there was something like, I'm not going to be staying here. Tick said something like he wasn't going to be staying there. And she's like, well, why? Like, and it just like that. I agree with you. Like that sort of awkward, like, what do we do? Like, we're sad, but we need to keep going is such a good, accurate representation of grief. So,
well, I mean, I think that it's an excellent representation of grief, but what I really thought about is, George, the story that Hippolyta got was that George was killed by this racist sheriff. And it made me think about, the families of Black people who die due to racist violence. And the having to continue, the having to go on with life, dealing with that grief and having that grief compounded by, the lack of not having closure, not having justice. I don't know, I'm not really sure what they told him as far as, it's 19, never mind. It's 1955. So there are no repercussions for that sheriff.
Right.
Emmett Till's mother, had to fight to have her son, brought back to Chicago. If Mississippi had their way, he would have been buried immediately. And, we never would have heard about what happened to Emmett Till. Her family would not have gotten any closure. There would not have been a trial. Yeah, I definitely got that from that breakfast scene, but I don't know. There are just so many little nuances in the show, and so many, I don't know how, I'm wondering if people are having the same reactions to some of these scenes, people who are not Black, people who are not, I don't know. Is there that sort of emotional burden after finishing that episode? Is it sort of something that sticks with you for 2 or 3 or 4 days after?
Yes.
Is there a slight sense of dread for everybody before they watch Lovecraft Country?
No joke.
Yes.
Well,
it just, and especially after losing Chadwick Boseman, it was a hard weekend. It was a hard week. It was a really, really, really hard.
It was. I do. Go ahead, Byron.
I'm just going back to what I have to circle back to what, you talked to Cianna about having this hard week, and it has been a really hard week, but I got to circle back to what Stanford said, because that actually, it's been hard to kind of grapple with my feelings about that scene with the children, because knowing that was a reference to, the Emmett, that was, supposed to be Emmett Till, that really bothered me. And it was just hard for me to really, it's a scene that, and honestly, I watched it again today twice, the show again today twice. And I found myself fast forwarding through that scene. It was so painful. It was so painful. It was really painful for me to watch that, right? To see that but I think the thing I like so much that you said is that Sam, that you said was how it actually kind of humanized him for us, right? Because, even going to the, just thinking about what we've learned about, Emmett Till, the first things that I'm remembering about him being, seeing, his mother wanting the coffin to be open, right? And viewing his body. But we get an opportunity to see him as a child, right? Because he wasn't treated like a child when he was killed. Right? He was murdered. He was treated like an adult. And so that really does help put that into a better context for me, I think. Because I honestly just I had to fast forward through that scene. The two times today, I was like, I can't watch this scene.
I never thought of Emmett Till as a child, honestly, until that scene. I remember the first time I saw that photo of his body in that open casket. I remember being a child and being terrified and having nightmares about it. And it was in a Jet magazine, and I hid it. I didn't, you know what I mean? It was, it was just very, very creepy. And I remember it being on a coffee table, and just for like weeks, just like every time I would walk by, just, you know, side-eyeing that coffee table, because I knew that horrific image and nightmares about that. And to see him in this context of just a kid going away on summer vacation for what was supposed to be like, you know, a couple of weeks on the countryside visiting relatives, it's just very, I was definitely, I was sick with grief after I became aware of that reference. It was really, really just.
To respond to your statement, Cianna, your question, is everybody reacting to the show this way? I suspect the answer is no. And for me, that's part of the beauty of this show, is that it is educational, right? I mean, there are things to learn by watching this. And as Stanford said, it takes it out of text, it puts it into lived life, so that the traumatic horror of this history is in your face, and it's in your heart when you're watching it, and you can't escape it unless you look away or try to think something different about it. So I very much appreciate, much like Watchmen did, they put it in your face, they put it in your heart, and you have to choose to stay or turn away. But I love the fact that they've done this for the culture. I think it's
and just to follow up on that too, like so I teach graduate students, and one of the classes I teach involves doing a cultural immersion, and because of the COVID, the Rona, that typically is like, you know, watch a documentary, read something, blah, blah, blah. And over this past semester, a lot of my students watched When They See Us on Netflix. And I was surprised at how many people were not aware of the Central Park Five, like didn't even know that happened.
right.
But it was also interesting to me because I have yet to watch that, nor do I want to watch that, because it is like, it's a horror. It's a traumatic experience. And so to your point, Scott, like choosing to, like, I still haven't watched Watchmen because I, like, emotionally, I am not ready. And I think that choosing to engage with it, or choosing to, you know what, I'm not going to subject myself to that, I think is interesting for Black people. I think, you know, when they see us, that has been like a lot of people that I talk to, they're like, no, I do not want.
I won't.
I love Ava, but girl, I can't. Like I can't. And so I think I'm hoping that Lovecraft doesn't become that for me, because it is so beautifully done. And I thought, like, reading the book, like, okay, I'm ready. But it's like every week they're like, you thought you were ready.
Yeah, no, exactly. I go back to Byron's point about his students who are watching this stuff and then asking him about the history, and the ability to actually bring history to life that way. And then for an educator to be able to say, well, we can read this, but if you want to feel it, watch this. And of course, if you know the history, then it's a different thing, right? As Stanford would call it, an artifact. I'm just thrilled that this artifact is in our world, and it can be. I would argue it will be used pedagogically spring semester. So, for sure.
Well, but I think what's also interesting about this is that we've also got something that both pushes the limits of horror and shows the limits of horror at the same time. So, I mean, like, one of my issues with a lot of the horror subgenres is the way it treats death, right? That it's something where sometimes it's something we're supposed to almost laugh at, right? And that in the process it cheapens life, right? And yet I think of that moment. I think of seeing the kids around the Ouija board, where they actually managed to come up with a horror moment that actually made me, it reminded me about the preciousness of life, the preciousness of every moment, and it was because of the impending death, as opposed to because, he died too soon, blah, blah, blah. No, it was actually knowing, for me it was knowing that for him the clock was ticking down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And
Vanessa, I'm sorry.
I will say too, Stanford, just on a random side note, like I think that Lovecraft has had some little cheap horror, like funny, like that whole scene this week with when she put the pictures down and the big head came up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a mess. I was like, no. Like it was one of those things where.
But you know what? If you're gonna be cheap,
it was not. It wasn't.
Well, I think the value of that is it just, like Stanford said, the scene with Emmett twists the trope, right? It's not the ghost that scares us, it's what actually happened that scared us, right? And we're not even seeing that happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know that's going to happen. And so it's kind of maybe the contrast between, like you're mentioning, the typical horror trope versus this is more horrible, right? No, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
well, but you know, for me, and this, I know this is gonna sound kind of trite, but having the cheesy ghost head rise up, and you know, given the history of treating black bodies with I would call an ugly sense of humor, it was kind of nice to see that embodiment of cheese being the white guy.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
like we got to be the cool ghosts.
Yeah.
Yeah, those were definitely the cool ghosts. That's fantastic. Vanessa, favorite scene, favorite line, favorite character?
So my favorite after the sort of exorcism scene was the entirety of the housewarming party. The beginning and just all the black joy, and she's walking around just like talking, pouring drinks, like, and didn't spill anything. Like, good for her.
Yeah.
And then to, you know, her and Tick communicating not with words, with other things, which I lived for that. And I knew that was her first time. As soon as she was like, oh my God, I knew that was her first time. But and, you know, the scene in the kitchen with her and Hippolyta, and then to end it with, as you said, Leandra, the Beyonce fierceness of like, okay, y'all playing too damn much. And she busted all those windows, and the way that Ruby was just ready with the getaway, like, give me the guns, I'm out. And then I feel like it's sort of like that whole scene with her, you know, sort of breaking the windows, but then it kind of like came full circle because you see them all just like put their hands up and get on the ground. And I was just like, damn, that scene could have been filmed in 2020 and with exactly the same everything and different clothes. And so I was kind of like, yes. And then when that happened, it was like, oh, you know, now it's back to, and then we cut to her sort of in the back of the police car. But I think that housewarming scene just took me on so many different emotional levels that I was tired at the end. And then it went to her police car, and I was ready to go to sleep after that. Like, I was like, God, it's too much already. And I don't even know if that was halfway through, but it was a lot, but beautifully done.
But here's the thing, interesting thing, Vanessa, is you actually touched upon the two other moments where I was like, oh my gosh, we get to be acknowledged as children. You know, and maybe it's just me, but that was actually one of the things that was interesting about the scene where she loses her virginity, right? Because to do that, it has to acknowledge that there's growth happening there, that she wasn't always a grown-up, right? You know, I mean, because what tends to happen is that Black characters tend to be presented fully formed as if they just fell from a tree and just blossomed as adults, right? That they don't go through all the traditional mile markers that we culturally think of as taking us towards adulthood. And so that scene was in that way was very precious to me. And then for that to lead up into the scene where she just starts busting in the windows, because I didn't just see anger in the busting in the windows, I saw like a rampant joy. You know, like it's like you're gonna mess with us. All right. I mean, because the first couple, like, she was angry, but after that, I just felt like it was just cathartic release, and it wasn't, and it still, it also made me think of it. it made me move along the spectrum of age in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that sort of like, so you go from seeing her in the bathroom, like after he leaves, and then, you know, she starts to cry. And then I think it was like maybe like the next frame that she
Right.
sort of comes out and she's like, okay. Like, and so the fact that I think she, like Black women typically have to do, is like, that was terrible, but I'm about to brush myself off and get shit done. And I feel like that scene, she could have stayed in the bathroom the entire time. She could have stayed there in the part. She did not, and I just feel like it just once again showcased that, like I said, Black women get shit done, and she was ready. Like, okay, like give me that bat, I got it. You know what I'm saying? They were, you know, and the men were kind of just standing back, and they were like, okay, she got it. You know what I'm saying? It was,
And go ahead.
And
Byron.
it was such a relief though, also, because I don't know about you, but I was really going crazy listening to that god darn horn in the background.
Yes.
I was like, when are they going to get rid of it? When are they going to get rid of it? And then she went out. I mean, that was also part of my joy. I'll be honest. Just like, get rid of the noise.
Right. And I love the way that they had a plan. They all knew what was going to happen, right? The Atticus, you know, lined up the troops with the shotguns, and like you said, Ruby drove up in the car, and they all knew exactly what they were going to do. And there's an adultness to that.
Well, it's also, you know, we've been here, done that. I mean, you'll hear Ruby make reference to, she's like, this is just like Trumbull all over again. Trumbull Park, I think it was. And then it was the, which in 1953, I want to say, in a housing project, a majority white housing project, a very light-skinned woman named Betty Howard, who was white passing, accidentally integrated a housing project because they assumed she was white. And, you know, when she had moved in with her African-American husband and 2 Black children, you know, what happened was a riot and a racial tension that lasted in that area of Chicago. I think it's on the south side of Chicago. Where is Deering, Stanford? That's like far south near like Calumet, I believe. So it's like the far south side, where there had to be a police presence there to protect the families, the Black families that integrated that housing project for 10 years. For 10 years. I mean, even when Letty's on that rough ride with the police officer, and he's asking her, where did you get the money? Where did you get the money to buy this house? I mean, that was the reality of, you know, if you dared to pioneer in a majority white neighborhood, that's what you were facing. You know, people are going to hurl racial slurs and stones and bricks and, you know, God knows what at you in your home. And it was, you know, again, every decision that was made for Black people during that time was literally a life or death decision. And it's really interesting, like, again, for a horror fantasy show, so much of the horror is steeped in realism. It is really, really hard to watch. And that's
it's not even
like cheesy fantasy moments, they kind of let me down even more. I'm like waiting for some magic. Can we get some monsters again? Like anything. And but we'll get to that. The horror is not really doing it for me.
It's not even magic realism, right? It's just straight up realism. That's the most horrible part of the whole thing.
But the other thing, picking up on what Cianna brought up, is even like the house itself, the Winthrop House, is a reference to a block in Chicago. Like, and it was like one of the first blocks in Chicago up on the north side that was integrated, where like they only let them move onto a specific block on Winthrop. Like Winthrop is it's like the street. And so there's actually a history around the Winthrop block, and what they did was they condensed it in the Winthrop House, right? You know, so I thought that, you know, again, I love the way in which they actually take this landscape that we take for granted, and through the storytelling actually allow us to learn something or to see something, right? You know, that they didn't just pull that out of thin air.
And I think part of the realism and the sort of emotional exhaustion and tragedy of watching the show is, again, insert 2020 and we're still dealing with the same shit. So this whole push at the RNC about, you know, we're going to keep this, you're not going to lose the suburbs, or there was something just that came out in the news in Wisconsin in a sort of suburb, which is like literally next door of Milwaukee. You know, a neighborhood was disseminating letters saying, you know, we're going to keep Wauwatosa white. We're going to keep it white. We don't want Black people here. And literally, this is a letter that they gave out in a neighborhood in 2020 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So it's kind of like, I think to what Cianna raised earlier, it is a lot watching this show, because it's just, it's so beautifully done, but it's just it's another reminder that we have not, how far have we moved since 1955 with regard to race relations in America? And I would say not very. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I wanna, since I'm cheating here because my favorite scene was the exorcism scene. But it was a real close tie with the restaurant scene where she was solving the puzzle, and they had this very, very sweet talk where she admitted that it was her first time, and that's why the moment had been tense afterward. And it goes back to what Stanford was talking about being able to be young, right? I very much appreciated Atticus's behavior at that moment. I didn't understand Atticus's behavior at that moment. I have to admit, I didn't understand his behavior afterwards in the bathroom. She was obviously upset, and I was surprised he wasn't, personally, I was surprised there wasn't a bit more of, what are you upset about? Can I help? But whatever it was, there was that moment of a relational softness in the restaurant, and I just loved it. And I think it goes back to what Stanford was talking about being able to be young.
That was actually one of my on my list of favorite scenes too, but it was a different reason. And it was, you know, when he walked in and you see her, like, this is like the first time we see her without makeup, when she's dressed and she has like all the papers scattered, like it's a disaster movie. And he just sits down and he's like, what's up? And then when she explains everything to him, he's like, okay, cool. Like, he does not question her. Yep. And part of me thinks it's because of what they went through in Ardham, but also he was just like, he was like, if you say it's what's up, like, it's what's up. And I think it was so, that would, like, it was a tender relational moment, but also the fact that he, even though, like, one could argue that objectively she was kind of like, okay, this is a lot, maybe hysterical, but he was just like, what's up? Right. Like, and he, no questions asked, he was there to support her, and then he was like, all right, let's go. And then they're there with the voodoo lady, and it just goes down. But I think it was just so, it was so beautiful the way they, even in that moment, you know, like after the conversation, sex that they had, he was like, okay, well, what we need to do to get your house back.
And, you know, when you mention that, this is like the third or fourth time where she's kind of taking the lead in some way in something. And it's in that moment where he kind of gets out of himself and he says, okay, take the lead. What am I going to do? How can I help? You know, when she's the one who decided to run in episode 1, right? He said, okay, you go. And then in this episode, so I just like the way that's playing out. I'm not sure what it means, but I like the way that it's playing out.
Well, it's the same thing in the bathroom. I think she was the one who sort of said to take after, you know, they had their entanglement. She was the one who said, you know, see you downstairs later. And he was just sort of like, okay,
yes, yes.
Right. You know.
Yes. No, when you put it in that way, then things do fall into place in the sense that she is providing a leadership role in their relationship. And he's perfectly comfortable with her doing that. And it's almost when she leads, he's most clear about who he is, right? All his uncertainties drop off, and he knows in this moment, you get the shotgun, you know, you do this, you do that. And I just like the way they're playing that. I'm not sure what it means, to be honest, but I appreciate that they're doing it that way. Stanford's second question. Favorite line, favorite character, favorite scene?
I've actually touched, actually I've already touched on 3, but
yeah.
I mean, yet again, Atticus is reduced to eye candy. You know,
It does not confuse because I don't know about that. He's more than that. He's so great.
If I ask you what you're talking about, I'm just going to embarrass myself, right? Yeah.
all I know is they managed to have a sex scene, and it's old boy who's the naked one, and you know that's actually kind of nice.
We
You know what
definitely
else?
find a reason. We definitely get to work in a shot of Atticus's behind.
Yeah, there you go.
Definitely make sure they write that in every episode. And I'm not.
There is a quota in someone's contract, and it is being filled.
There you go. So, Cianna, favorite scene, favorite line, favorite character?
My favorite line, y'all. It is the very end.
Yes.
What is the name? I keep wanting to call her Kayla because in the book it is Christina. When she says you can't just go around killing white women.
Oh my goodness.
It was so ridiculously cheesy and lame that it kind of actually drew me out of my grief. I was feeling this entire episode, and I kind of had a little whiplash there, just sort of like, what, girl? Y'all, we need to talk about the Braithwaites. Whatever suspense they had built up in that first episode, around first and second episode around that family and the order is gone. It's completely disappeared. And now it's like borderline comic relief. I mean, when she showed up at the end of the third episode, I was just kind of like, okay, this might be interesting. And then she goes into this clumsy dialogue about these pages and the Sons of Adam, and it's just ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, I think the writers are trying to show just how not highly intelligent she is. And in other words, in that very scene, she paralyzes him with a spell and then tries to persuade him to join her on the quest. I mean, it sounds to me like she's trying to have him help her go find the pages. And then she says that crap and she leaves. I mean, yeah, you're the one that's not very smart. You know?
Okay, girl. I mean, what are the stakes? Again, what are the stakes in this? I mean, what is stopping Atticus from just being like, no.
No, exactly.
Actually, I won't. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And I read a really interesting article in The Atlantic. And I read an interesting article in The Atlantic. It was a review of the show. And the author makes a really, really great point that we're kind of going into like weird caricature territory with the way white people and anti-Black racism is being portrayed. White people, well, I'll say white people and white supremacy are being portrayed on screen.
Mm-hmm.
And there is something, it's almost comical. And I think one of the most chilling and terrifying things about racism is the subtlety of racism. And like, as I was saying, you know, I preferred Sam Braithwaite in the book in that he just had this very cold indifference and subtlety in his interactions with Atticus. And I just sort of feel for the show that it's just very OTT, just a little over the top for me. I hope they can bring it back in the fourth, in the next week, but they're losing me a little bit.
One thing that kind of I find kind of interesting about that is that because one thing I noticed that whenever Christina shows up, it's like she literally takes up all of the oxygen in the room.
All of
it. But what's funny about her taking up all the oxygen in the room is she's taking up all the oxygen in the room, but she's completely vacuous. And she's there is this perpetual like assertion of importance that she does not and is incapable of ever owning or truly exhibiting. And in that way, she is, it is like they backed into doing the ultimate the ultimate portrayal of a Karen. You know,
Yeah.
you know, it's the way she holds space, the pettiness, but pettiness that could be dangerous and life threatening, right? All of that kind of comes through for me, and you know, and that's where I'm kind of ambivalent about the caricature of white, the way they're caricaturing white racism, because I completely see your point, Cianna, on that. But at the same time, I'm like, you know, when I'm indexing it against other horror films that I've seen, especially horror films of that time, I'm looking at it in terms of, oh wait, so when I looked at those, the people of color were the one that were really, really shallow, right? And so in that moment, in that juxtaposition, it does kind of reassure me that this is my story, it's not theirs.
Yeah.
It's almost as if there's a bit of an absurdist humor going on, right? That they're making these characters absurd, saying, look at how, as you just said, you know, takes up all the oxygen in the room, doesn't have a real damn thing to say, right? Look how absurd your existence is. Look how absurd your self-importance is, to the point where we're going to laugh at it, right? Oh, and why do you get to keep talking the whole time? Because of your power, right? Because of your spell. Because if it weren't for that, we wouldn't be listening. Atticus wouldn't be listening. So no, there is that absurdist element to it that I pick up on.
And I think to Cianna's point on that too, like, to me, the danger of that is that we still, in the year 2020, have this idea that racism is the overt, the Klan, the Lancasters, the the sheriff lady with the red hair. Like, people think that if they're not that, then they're not racist. And absolutely not. You know what I'm saying? And so that was something I appreciated about Caleb in the book, was that he wasn't like out here being extra with it, but he still was problematic. So I do think that we're kind of, and again, I also have to own that I'm thinking about this with a 2020 mindset, you know.
Right.
But I think that is something that we're sort of missing out on, because I do think that all of those caricatures existed in 1955. There were also the people that were not as overt, they were more covert, and I think that that is, along with the overt racism, is the racism that we continue to fight today. And so I do think that if we are only seeing, you know, that representation of racism, I do think that we're sort of missing out. I think that the showrunners are missing out on some other piece of knowledge that they can share with the audience.
I gotta tell you what, first episode of The Watchmen, they dealt with exactly what you're concerned about. In the very first episode of Watchmen, you saw Regina King practically be in love with Don Johnson's character. Not romantically, just this incredibly deep friendship. And this thing about trust and the systematic nature of who's racist and who isn't. Watchmen just made it clear, don't trust anyone. That very first episode, it's so stunningly well done. And I completely agree, Cianna. We've not seen that character to trust yet. We've not seen that person who we would think, oh my God, if they were to betray Atticus and Letty, right? That's a really good point. And I think that's why the first episode of Watchmen is so off the hook, because it's just in your face from the very beginning. Leandra, I interrupted you. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Cianna.
No. I'm sorry. I think Leandra was saying something. Sorry.
Leandra, you were going to say something.
No, I was just saying, I think the point about making it absurd and that being dangerous is a really good one, because it means you don't have to take it seriously. And I think that we're doing that in our country right now, that it's like, oh, well, of course that's crazy. And when you don't take something like that seriously, you find yourself not preventing it. And so I agree that absurdity of it misses out on, I don't know, like you said, I think it sort of dismisses it, or it's like so over the top that it's too easy for white people to look at it and be like, well, of course not that. But yeah, that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And so I think that's something that I was left feeling really uncomfortable with, and it couldn't quite put my finger on, except that it is very, very serious. I mean, like Atticus said at one point, they're treating you the way we treated prisoners of war. They're turning up your heat. They're making you go insane. Like, this is war to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so to make it absurd and be like, oh, it's a bunch of people in hoods. Yeah, it's a bunch of people in hoods lighting things on fire. Like, it needs to be taken seriously. So I was just saying I agree with that. And there's lots of reasons why maybe they're doing it the way they are, like Stanford said. There just is a danger in that.
I think we all probably believe that over the next 7 episodes, they're going to probably deal with that issue, right? Maybe not, I don't know. But yeah.
Well, there's actually a scene that we haven't really talked about, which I think actually captures how in these racially charged situations, how things can turn on a dime. Was when Letitia she's arrested and she's in the back of the truck, right? With the other police officer, and he's kind of interrogating her, but there is this kind of thin veil of there's an interesting thin veil where I felt like for a moment it was where it was more about patriarchy than it was about race in the way he was talking to her. And then when he reached up and grabbed that leather strap to brace himself, and then they started doing the thing where they start moving the car, like, and it's straight up shades of Freddie Gray, right? And to me that was actually one of the more horrifying moments, because in my mind, it immediately brought me to Baltimore, and it brought me to when I was doing police ride-alongs in Baltimore, and I would hear police officers talk about doing that casually, and then years later, the Freddie Gray incident happens and someone dies, right? So like the moment he did that, I'm like, and the moment she started to get thrown around, I'm like thinking, oh.
Right. Leandra, favorite line, favorite character, favorite scene?
The only one I had left, I already brought up and like stole my own thunder, which was just the portrayal of it as war and white people feeling like it is war. Like, how fragile are you that someone moving into your neighborhood sets you off, that you're declaring war? Like, it just, the whole, and like Cianna said, it makes it seem so absurd, but it's reality, and it's a dangerous reality. And so just that whole conversation they have in the boiler room, I think set up a lot for the episode. Because she is fighting a war on 2 different fronts, one in her house and one on her front lawn. And I think it's just a lot to process.
I'm going to do a favorite line, and I'm going to cheat and do 2 quickly, because one borders on comedy and the other is very serious. But when Atticus is talking to his father about the fact that they haven't told Hippolyta the truth about George yet, and Montrose says, you want to tell Hippolyta that wizards exist, that white folks have magic on their side too? Come on, that's, for me, you don't want to laugh, but that's pretty darn good comedy. And I felt bad for laughing, but at the same time, it was very, very clever. And then my favorite line goes, Letty said it when she was talking to Atticus in a restaurant, and she's coming to grips with how she's been behaving over the past couple weeks. And she says, I gotta find it here. I thought the world was one way, and now I know that it's not. I can't live in fear. I won't. I need to meet this new world head on, right? Just boom. There's an awakening there that we're going to be witnessing over the next 7 episodes as to how her awakening plays out, and what she does to meet this new world head on. And well, that's what a lot of us are doing right now, right? How do we deal with this world head on? And so I'm interested to track that over the next, because I'm sure that line was there on purpose. It was kind of preamble to where we're going with her character. And I thought it was stunning. Someone else, Byron.
So with my favorite line, trying to figure out a way to say it since we're recording. When Ruby,
No, say what you want, man. It's all good.
Ruby's talking to Letitia, and she says, I thought you was just a fuck up, but really you just fucked up. So I think that was really important because it kind of goes back to some of the conversation I think we've been having about Tick and Letitia, because I think there's also this level of dysfunction with both of those characters, right? The reason why Tick is so angry, I think the reason why Letitia appears so unsure of herself at times, but also, I think in this episode we saw this development, like I was talking about earlier, where from the very beginning of the episode, from seeing her in the church scene to seeing her, how she kind of I don't know if she unravels so much when she goes out and breaks the windows in the cars, but I think that's really kind of letting us know that this is dysfunction that's happened also, right? And she's trying to. I think she's always kind of struggling with, with her relationship with she and her mother, and she and her sister, and she and her brother. And I think that Ruby's, when Ruby says that to her, and by the way, I think Ruby delivered that absolutely.
Oh my God, that scene was fantastic.
That absolutely wonderfully. But we see this level of I think what this dysfunction is with Tick and with Letitia, right? That there's something there that almost empowers them also, right? The fact that she has so much that she has to deal with. And then I think Ruby delivers that line to us, so we understand still that there is something. Now I will say my other line was, I guess, Scott, you talked about this, that what we're gonna tell them, that white folks got magic on their side too. And I guess for me, when he said that, it was again really frightening, because it was almost like, for me as a Black person, I was thinking, yeah, what else can they have? Damn, they already got so much, right? It makes it so hard that, I don't know, for me, everything just tied in so wonderfully in this episode. To me, it's been, and I think I heard you all talking about the when Christina, her name is Christina, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You really have to be smarter than this. You can't go around. What did she say? Did she say killing or shooting white women? Right?
Can't go around killing white women. Like, yeah.
And I had to. For me, that made me think about. It made me tie that into the whole issue with the whole scene dealing with Emmett Till in the basement, because it kind of showed that danger of white women, in this time, right? How dangerous it was for this Black man to, of course, the dangers of, of a Black child passing by a white woman and possibly saying something to her or looking at her or whatever. And then, the danger of a Tick, going in there and wanting to kill her, right? And how dangerous that was. So I know you all talked about that already. I just kind of want to that also. But so I had a number of favorite lines. So no, you only asked for one, but
no, I wanted to comment on your take on Ruby's comment, right? What I like about what we're seeing in I almost called her Eve, right? What I like about what we're seeing in Letty's character is, I guess a certain wildness. That's not the word I want to use, but what I like about it is this is a force of nature, right? This young woman is a force of nature, and there's a bit of a trickster goddess to her, right? She's not interested in your order. As a matter of fact, she's gonna subvert your order if she wants to. And so there's this casual boldness that shows up in different ways in different contexts. And I'm thrilled to see where they go with that, right? What do you do when you're a trickster, right? How do you, change the world? Cianna.
I think Letty is immature. I don't know that she's necessarily a force of nature or a trickster. I see a little bit of myself in her immaturity as the youngest of three children. three girls. So I see a lot of the conflicts that she has with her sister and some of the relationships that I have with my sisters, quite frankly.
Right.
I think she's also, for someone who is so brilliant and brave, it is amazing how the sort of lack of awareness she has around her own privilege, around her light skin privilege. And there are there's like a weird colorism thing going on between Ruby and Letty. And I think when we this upcoming episode, we'll see Letty going out for her job interview at Marshall Fields, and I think we'll get, not Letty, Ruby, we'll get some more scenes with Ruby, and I think this is something we're going to be talking about a lot next week, but I don't know how I feel about the dynamic between these two sisters, and I've seen sort of Ruby sort of burst on the scene as this beautiful, bold, brash woman herself in episode 1, and over time she's sort of morphing. It's almost as if her only reason for being is to sort of oppose Letty, which is really, really weird. I didn't see, this is not where I saw that dynamic going. For some reason, she wants this job at Marshall Fields, but the idea of living in a white neighborhood terrifies her. Letty is this activist, and she's very much out there on the front lines of the fight for social justice. And then while Ruby's playing cards during the house party, she makes this weird pull yourself up by your bootstraps comments. If more colored people thought like me, the race would be completely, or something to that effect. So I don't know. I'm a little disappointed where they're going with Ruby's character. I'm interested to see where it's going to take her, but I think some of the boldness and brashness that you bring up with Letty, I think that's part of her privilege, and it's something that she's very, very blind to and very unaware of. And again, I just think it'll be interesting to see where this,
absolutely,
how this develops.
Isn't it kind of fun though to see that dynamic between the two of them though, to see
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah, really embodying these two different ideals of racial justice. It played out through those two women, I think, is really kind of interesting to me. And like you said, to see what they're going to do with that. So I never watched the previews for the next week, but I'll be interested to see how they play that out between the two of them.
And it is really, really interesting to see what a win looks like, what the stakes are. For Ruby, a victory is a job at a perfume counter at Marshall Fields. For Letty, it's owning a home in a white neighborhood as an African-American woman, as an African-American and as a woman. So for those two, the stakes, couldn't be any more different. And I just, it's a very interesting dynamic. And when she was yelling at her sister, I've been yelled at like that by my sister. And it doesn't feel good.
No.
At all. I have been yelled at like that, and you just feel terrible. I felt for Letty. I was like,
So let me the worst. We talked about that kind of the first episode, this whole notion of and you brought it up also, the this whole idea of the color difference, right? And I know my mother will always tell me about how, her mother had a fairer complexion than her aunt, right? So there was always this tension in that her grandmother favored, her mother over her sister, right? And I don't know, everything about it, but just I like that that they're playing on that a little bit. I guess they're playing on it some, I suppose, right? But I like to. It's interesting seeing that play out. But
well, when I heard Ruby give that small speech at the poker table, I got a W.E.B. Du Bois versus Booker T. Washington vibe in terms of what should we be aspiring to. And W.E.B. Du Bois says, I'm going to do what I want. I am going to do what I want and not ask you if it's okay. And I'm going to carry myself in such a way where I'm going to get what I want. Whereas Booker T. Washington had a more vocational take And I just saw that tension there. I don't know if it's on purpose or not, but
yeah, I mean, I definitely get the whole, respectability politics between the two of them. And it just sometimes I just don't know if it's necessary. I was talking to Stanford about this today.
So it seems a little heavy-handed.
Is their relationship more interesting as a relationship between two sisters, sort of dealing with these issues internally? Or do they have to sort of represent, two sides of
right.
Black political ideology? I mean, it's a little exhausting. I don't know.
I mean,
go ahead.
It actually could be nice. I mean, pointing off of that, I mean, it would have been nice to see them represent a difference within a similar ideology,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because the other like little dig that there's like Ruby makes reference to all Letitia's arty friends, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like she's the arty one who's irresponsible, and she's the one who gets this money that just kind of drops on her. She is the lightest skinned person at her party in her house with tons of blackness in there, right?
With lines.
In
the whole show.
Yeah.
In the whole show.
And
okay.
yeah. I mean but here's the thing. We actually see Ruby sing. In other words, we see Ruby perform art,
Mm-hmm.
and we see everybody talk about Letty as an artist.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Drop the mic. That's the second time. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, does anyone else have a scene? Favorite scene, favorite character, favorite line?
I feel like this conversation kind of segues into my favorite characters, which one is Letty and the other is Tick. And the reason that I like them is because I so much appreciate, maybe it's because I'm a therapist, but like highly complex, conflicting character. Like to me, like Uncle George was like, he was just so great. Like everything about him was so great. Even though he had this secret, it's like, you're so great. And I feel like with Letty and Tick, the way that Jonathan Majors like portrays just like you see, he's so tight all the time. He's so like, internally conflicted. And then him and his dad, they're just like, ugh. And then I think we see Letty and we saw her in sort of like, when we were introduced to her and she had all this like, hip sway and looking at the white women like, what, bitch, like, and then we see her go through all we see these many different sides of her. And I just always appreciate characters that it's like, I don't know if I like you, like the Thanoses, the Killmongers, the Jokers, like the characters where it's like, maybe I should not like you, but you're like saying some real stuff. And so I so much appreciate the complexity of their characters. And as things progress with whatever quest is about to happen, I don't know what's going to be happening. What is happening, but whatever quest they go on, like you can see like how I just think that they're wonderfully complicated, and I think that is so much more a representation of human existence than the Supermans of the world that are just like
well said. Yeah,
boring.
exactly. And last week Stanford talked about Atticus's superhero origin story, and I got to tell you, at the end of this episode, that was Letty's moment, right? When everything that she was poured out into that basement room, it's like, okay, what's next? Who is she going to become now? Because she has seen it, she has confronted it, and she has overcome it with pure power and will. And there's a certain superhero element that she can take with her into the rest of the show by having confronted the things that she confronted and actually healed people. So we'll see what happens. Anyone else?
I was going to add, I think to Vanessa's point about the complexity, the person that I'm really looking forward to seeing more from is actually Hippolyta. I don't know if I'm saying her name right. I'm saying it. It's sitting in front of me. Mostly because I think that she does a really great job of showing lots of different things in this episode. Like she tears up that Dracula book and she just looks so intense. She clearly misses them and she clearly knows that something's up and she's not stupid and she's biding her time. She's gonna figure it out. I'm looking forward to see where she goes. I hope she has a bigger role in figuring everything out, because they've spent so much time in showing you that inner thought process this episode with her, that just that whole scene with her ripping at the Dracula book, I was like, don't, but like, oh, I get it, like, yes, but, and then she buys a new one because she feels guilty, so I'm really excited to see what they do with her.
What's the name of, go ahead.
I want to see more of Hippolyta and Montrose interacting, because they actually had really interesting chemistry in that one scene where he was bringing in the groceries. Yes. And I'm hoping that there's a really interesting story there, because I'm actually a little bit ambivalent about Atticus and Letitia's romance. I feel like it's the one I've seen coming a mile away. I think that there are some really interesting moments of tenderness, but there's also something about it that is it's almost very cliche, I don't want to say stereotypical, very cliche in terms of the genre. It's always like the love interest is always the most beautiful woman with the guy who matches kind of the strong, silent, heroic type who's able to reach out in certain moments, and and then just the way she objectifies him is so unseemly. I just don't think that I can get into that romance. But no, I say that jokingly, but the issue for me is that there's something about that romance where it's like, I feel like I've been there before. And there are these other interesting relationships where I feel like I haven't been there before. Right. And not just Hippolyta and Montrose. I'm thinking also Atticus and Dee. That in the first episode, that moment where he sneaks up the fire escape, you could the chemistry between Dee and Atticus just radiated off the screen for me. I want to see that. And I guess that's my hope, is I want to see some relationships that kind of that move outside of what we've been spoon fed too much of.
Yeah. I think that goes back to Byron's ambivalence about Atticus when we talked about episode 1, right? What are we going to see here? So I think what the two of them just went through in that basement, they went through hell and Ardham as well. I'm hoping that what happens is the kind of thing you're talking about, something we haven't seen before. And yeah, we'll wait and see. It should be exactly.
We'll see what happens after their quest.
Quest, all these stories. What is about to happen? And then the previews, I know you did a watch of Byron, but it's 14 different things going on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anyone else?
Oh, I just have to talk about I just want to say just something about the music, just to get some feedback about what you all thought about the music. The things that they played, the soundtrack, and each week, who is it? TuneFind kind of picks up on it. It gives the soundtrack for the episodes, and I just love the way that they're playing with the music with this, right? I'm gonna tell you, this whole episode to me was just, for some reason, it just speaks church to me, right? I start off with church there, but with all the scenes when Letitia goes out and she breaks the windows in the cars, then we have Dorinda Clark Cole would Take It Back, right? And it's just something about the way they place music. And in the church scene at the beginning, that's, I wrote it down. What was it? Oh, I can't remember. Oh, I can't remember who it is. But anyway, it's just all of those, the music, but also to bring in Marian Anderson, right? In the scene with the father listening to opera, right? And to pay homage to Marian Anderson was just brilliant to me. And that it's making us also aware of the importance of Black art, right? Of Black culture in that way also, and putting these songs into the show to help tell that story. Because I'll tell you, when she went out to break the windows in that car, the power of, you know, having that song playing with Take It Back, right? And she was taking back what had been taken away from them with that burning of the cross on the lawn, taking away that dignity of your blackness, right? And to put that song in and to slow it down. And if you notice, I mean, they did a really good job with the placement of that song, right? Because there's certain things that she does when she's breaking the windows that hits right on certain beats of that song. And it's the same thing with that beginning scene with the poem. A tear drops right at the moment of a certain part of that song playing. So they do a really good job with that music. And so for me, I don't know why, I'm still trying to figure out. And I'll tell you all, I'm cheating while you're talking because I'm writing a lot of notes while you're talking about this because I'm shameless.
We're impressed. We have something worthy to say.
Well, I got a contract for a book that's an edited volume of looking at media and film post Ferguson, right? Post Mike Brown, and looking at how are we seeing a difference in representations of race since Ferguson. But there's the other book is with University of South Carolina Press, and this one is looking at trauma and race through a rhetorical lens. And it's just something about this whole episode that reads of church to me, right? From, the going in trouble and then coming out on the other side of that, knowing there's still going to be trouble when you leave the building, but it's just something that within that church, right? That's a moment where you can kind of let go of all that and release all that and possibly catch. Now, I grew up in a conservative Baptist church, right? So we didn't see all that kind of stuff in the church. Right? But when I went to college and I sang in the gospel choir, I visited churches where you had all that going on. And I just remember hearing the elders of those churches saying, this is this place where you can come for 2 hours, or some cases 3 or 4 hours. And right. And you can let go of all that stuff. Right. And music plays such an important part of that. Huge. And I think that's why I really appreciate and enjoy the music that they're using in these episodes. So,
well, I really appreciate your comment about the entire episode being, having religion as a theme. What I loved about the final scene was she basically conjured the spirits of these people to heal themselves. She conjured them to help her and Atticus actually save them, right? And so you don't see the Christian God of individuality saving the moment. What you see is a conjurer who's basically taking her power with the dead to help her and Atticus in the moment. And it's stunningly well done, and they're all around this one individual white man in the middle. I mean, it's all quite clear. It's a collectivist way of looking at religion, and she's calling upon her spiritual elders, not her elders in that sense, but to help solve the present. And so it's almost like it's a contrast, right? Because when she's in the church at the beginning, even though she's with a lot of people, she's very alone. Right, she's very alone in her own thoughts, and this is a whole different type of religious experience at the end of the episode.
A lot of those contrasts do exist. Coming from a Jamaican background, I grew up in a very strict Pentecostal household where there was speaking in tongues and the Holy Spirit, and we dressed very, very modestly. You couldn't show your arms, you couldn't show your legs. You'd be in Jamaica in 150 degrees in church with no air conditioning in a long dress with stockings and a jacket and all this nonsense. But, these are the same people who were incredibly superstitious, who did believe in an afterlife, who did believe that spirits walked amongst them, who believed in roots, who believed in, working wabia, and people can work wabia on you. It's just really, really, really interesting. Those contradictions are very much a part of Black and African-American culture.
Yeah, even in the Baptist church and whatever other churches existed in America, right? There were still folk who, I won't say any names, but we're still talk about doing things to help you get rid of somebody. Right?
A spell or two has been cast against my family. I will
I
never.
love hearing you talk about this.
Sometimes you're just like, Mom.
I love hearing you talking about, growing up in Pentecostal in Jamaica, because it's the same. I don't know if you've seen Grace Jones's documentary.
Her grandfather, that's my church.
That's your church, right?
He
Yeah.
was our pastor.
And I love how that
Crazy.
film captures that, right? Yeah.
It was insane. It was insane.
Okay. Go ahead, Cianna.
I do have one more thing, and
Yeah.
before the article that I referenced was written by the Atlantic article that I referenced earlier was written by Hannah Georges, who's a fantastic cultural commentator, and I will share the link with you guys.
Oh, fantastic. So that about wraps it up for tonight's episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. Brothers and sisters, please tell the audience where they can find you on social media. Cianna.
Hi, my name is Cianna Greaves. You can find me on Twitter at ccgreaves.com. That's at CICIGREAV as in Victor, E as in Sam.
Stanford.
I am Stanford Carpenter, and you can find me on Facebook and Twitter at Stanford Carpenter. There are a lot of Stanfords, there are a lot of Carpenters, but there's only one Stanford Carpenter, and that be me.
There you go. Byron.
I'm Byron Craig, and you can find me on Twitter at Byron B. Craig, and on Instagram at Byron Steve, and on Facebook.
Fantastic. Vanessa.
I'm Vanessa Hintz. You can find me on Facebook at Dr. Vanessa Hintz, and also on Twitter and Instagram at Dr. Vanessa Hintz. HINTZ as in zebra.
Fantastic. Leandra.
Yep, I'm Leandra Parris. You can find me on Twitter at Parris Leandra. That's Paris with 2 R's, not like France. At Parris Leandra.
And I'm Scott Jordan, and you can find me on Twitter at dark_loops. You can find all episodes of the Seers of Ardham at the Dark Loops Productions channel on YouTube. If you'd like to leave feedback about this podcast, please leave it below on this YouTube channel or send a message to darkloopsproductions@gmail.com. We'll be sure to read it at the end of our next podcast. So there it is from all of us to all of you. Big hugs, and remember, Wakanda Forever.
Forever.
You don't need no reason to travel. Unknown horrors leaving in plain sight. Oh, God, stealing bread drives the world insane. Turn that evil darkness to healing.